It happened quietly, the way most power grabs do. Not with tanks in the streets or sirens wailing in the night, but in bureaucratic memos, rewritten job descriptions, and late-night filings buried in the back of federal dockets.
Also developing, a federal judge is blocking President Trump's executive order shutting down the education department. The judge also ordered the agency to reinstate employees who'd been fired. The preliminary injunction stops the administration from carrying out two plans announced in March that sought to work toward Trump's goal of dismantling the department.
The Trump administration had a plan, not just to reform education, but to strip the Department of Education down to its bones, to dismantle it from the inside, to turn the agency that once fought for equal access, for civil rights in classrooms, for student protections, into an empty shell, an administrative zombie that still bore the title, but none of the purpose. They called it streamlining. They called it draining the swamp. But what they were doing was simple, defunding the mind of a nation. And then a judge said no. A federal judge, cloaked not in ideology but in law, stood between Donald Trump's administration and the complete hollowing out of American education.
A district court judge in Massachusetts who was hearing a case over the dismantling of the Department of Education and the transferring of all of those millions of dollars of student loans that are run by the government to the Small Business Association. Well, that judge has now issued an injunction blocking that process.
With one ruling, the plot was stopped, at least for now. The plan, which would have slashed the department's regulatory powers, outsourced key functions to unaccountable third parties, and redefined the federal role in education into near-nothingness, was halted. The judge called it what it was, legally unsound, procedurally flawed, dangerous, not merely bad policy but illegal policy, because that's what too few people understand about Trumpism. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it moves through red tape and personnel changes and long chains of emails.
Freezing the mass firings of Department of Education employees here in Washington, D.C., and also blocking the transfer of those loans to a different agency. The judge saying basically that the Trump administration can't dismantle an agency without an act of Congress. Congress created the agency, so that this is yet again another, if temporary, setback for the Trump administration delivered by an individual judge in a district court case. At least for now, slowing down efforts to overhaul the federal government here in Washington, Alex.
Sometimes the war against democracy is waged not in the streets, but in the machinery of government itself, where watchdogs are fired, agencies are defanged, and missions are quietly rewritten by political appointees who speak in press release euphemisms while wielding sledgehammers. The Department of Education was one of the ripest targets. Under Trump, and particularly under his education secretary, Betsy DeVos, it was treated less like a guardian of the public trust and more like an enemy. DeVos, a billionaire heiress with no experience in public education, made no secret of her disdain for public schools. Her mission was never reform. It was sabotage. She slashed funding, weakened protections for disabled students, tried to roll back Title IX sexual assault guidelines, and repeatedly sided with for-profit loan servicers over the borrowers drowning in debt. But this latest plan, the one the judge just blocked, was the final move, the endgame, the dismantling of the department's core functions: civil rights enforcement, loan forgiveness oversight, grant management, regulatory power. The Trump administration aimed to spin off these responsibilities into a decentralized network of private contractors and state-level agencies, where federal standards could be quietly ignored, where protections could dissolve without public debate, where education could be commodified and politicized into nothing more than another culture war arena. They almost got away with it. Because while the country was distracted by indictments, border walls, and social media noise, this hollowing out happened in the background, a slow erosion. And that's how democracies die, not just by fire, but by neglect, by silence, by letting institutions rot until they crumble under their own weight. The Department of Education was not perfect. It never has been. But it represented a national promise that education mattered, that every child deserved a chance, and that the federal government had a role in defending that right when states failed to do so. The judge's ruling was more than a procedural decision. It was a warning. It declared that the Trump administration's plan violated core legal standards, that it failed to undergo proper public review, that it overstepped its executive authority, that it endangered the very people the department was meant to serve. It reminded the country that dismantling a public institution cannot happen in the shadows, that federal power is not a personal plaything, and yet the ruling was also a mirror. Because if this plan had succeeded, if this gutting of the department had gone through without challenge, how many would have noticed? How many would have understood what was being lost? Because education doesn't collapse all at once. It dies in classrooms with 45 students and one exhausted teacher. It dies in school libraries, shuttered for lack of funding. It dies when marginalized students no longer have a federal office to call when they're denied their rights. It dies when the promise of opportunity becomes a luxury. That's what was at stake here, and still is. Because this isn't over. Trumpism, even out of office, has laid the blueprint. The next time the White House is captured by someone who sees the federal government not as a tool for progress, but as a nuisance to be neutralized, this plan, or something like it, will come back. It may wear a different name. It may arrive in better PR packaging, but the goal will be the same: to erase the federal commitment to education as a public good, to turn schooling into a battlefield, to abandon the poor, the disabled, the undocumented, the struggling, and then call it freedom. That's why this ruling matters, because it proved that even now, with the courts politicized, with faith in institutions eroding, with cynicism at an all-time high, the law can still hold the line. Not always, not forever, but sometimes. And in moments like this, that's enough. Because from this small legal victory may grow a larger resistance, one rooted in the radical idea that education is not just a policy issue, it is a human right. We are living in an era where the very notion of truth is under attack, where facts are rewritten, where history is politicized, where books are banned and curriculums sanitized, where teachers are censored. And in that world, to defund the Department of Education is not just a bureaucratic act, it is a cultural revolution, one that seeks to make ignorance the default and critical thinking the enemy. But that revolution hit a wall today, a legal one, a principled one. And if there's a message to take from this moment, it's this: the fight for education is the fight for democracy itself, and that fight is far from over.
Also developing, a federal judge is blocking President Trump's executive order shutting down the education department. The judge also ordered the agency to reinstate employees who'd been fired. The preliminary injunction stops the administration from carrying out two plans announced in March that sought to work toward Trump's goal of dismantling the department.
Freezing the mass firings of Department of Education employees here in Washington, D.C., and also blocking the transfer of those loans to a different agency. The judge saying basically that the Trump administration can't dismantle an agency without an act of Congress. Congress created the agency, so that this is yet again another, if temporary, setback for the Trump administration, delivered by an individual judge in a district court case, at least for now, slowing down efforts to overhaul the federal government here in Washington, Alex.